So welcome to this session, Cultivating Developer Adoption. This is a very important topic for when we're thinking about shifting left and encouraging and engaging with developers to adopt security practices within their workflows. A little bit about myself. My name's Simon Maple. I'm the Field CTO at Snyk. I've been at Snyk for just over 5 years now, and my background is very engineering based. So I am a developer at heart. I've been in development for 20 plus years, doing product development initially, followed by some developer advocacy, working with communities and so forth. And I would say probably just over the last decade, I've been working around developer tooling, and I'm very passionate about understanding how developers adopt tooling and how we can best enable them to be empowered enough to use that tooling as they go. So enough about me. Let's jump in. And a couple of things that we're going to be talking about here today. So first of all, why is successful developer adoption even important to us? And we should also mention that this isn't something that is very easy necessarily. It's something that's hard to do well. And we'll cover why that's hard and really kind of look at some of the pain points. And if we don't cover some of the pain points that that you feel are kind of like hurting your organizations most, feel free to drop them into the chat as well, and we can discuss those as we go. And then we're going to talk about some best practices, and these best practices are really based on a lot of my discussions with various organizations and customers over the last 10 years or so who have been trying to adopt tooling designed for developers and how to almost like sell that to developers and introduce it to developer workflows. And we'll look at 3 different categories there: people, process, and tools in ways which we can make changes in each of those categories to help. So a little bit about why it's important, why it's hard. So obviously everyone's going to be here in different stages of their I guess changing organizational transformations, I guess. And one of the big shifts that we've seen, of course, is agile as well as DevOps. And one of the big focuses on DevOps really is to allow developers to own everything that they build and actually work in a very autonomous fashion, in a very independent manner as a DevOps team. And for every time that a developer in that team needs to reach out or request something of another group or part of the organization, that's overhead, and that causes friction and can be frustrating and can cause pain for the development team. So a development team wants to work in that DevOps independent, autonomous team as frictionlessly as possible. So everything that they can do themselves is ultimately very, very frictionless. And from a security point of view, the approach that we have needed to take from the traditional approach of security, whereby it was a phase done at a certain time with siloed security teams leading that, very audit based, and effectively provided to development teams as a report. This is now, as we know, pushed much more into this dev first motion, where security testing, the auditing, effectively happens in process, in that figure 8 style delivery method. And this idea of DevSecOps breaking the silos and the barriers down, allowing security and dev to work in a more integrated way through the workflows and the process, allows developers the empowerment to work on security, but with the expertise of connecting with security. So let's look at another problem here, which I'm sure is one that we're all familiar with, which is this is a good quote from Gene Kim, one of the guys who wrote the DevOps, the DevOps handbook. And here, this is really the ratio between developers, the ops, and security, and it's core and key that we recognize we can't scale our security teams to match the demand of development needs, and to that we really mean as development teams scale and deliver much faster, the sheer number of requests that would come to the security team would very quickly bottleneck us and actually become a frustration point and a friction point for development teams. So the core to this is how we effectively scale our security work to those 100 people, so rather than have that one person trying to lead that for them. So that's the question: how do we push that into the 100? When we talk about some of the challenges in pushing security to development teams, one of the big challenges when we offer out security to devs is security is noisy. There can be many alerts on any number of types of issues, and very often we as security provide the developers with a big list of issues, a big list of problems, and very often what these reports contain isn't actually relevant to the actions that a developer needs to take. So it provides an issue. Maybe it's a type of issue. Is a developer familiar with that? Does it pinpoint where a developer needs to make a change in the code and what change they actually need to make? Does it distinguish between first-party code, third-party code, or some other artifact that this might be there? So the greater the noise is the greater the frustration. Conflicting results, context switching, all of these make a development team and a DevOps team want to circumvent your process and want to circumvent doing security. So this is a significant roadblock for adoption, and developers will try and find, dev teams will try and find another way around this. One of the other areas that is very important is when developers aren't experts on security, and very often when a developer hears about a security issue, these alerts are sometimes given to them in what might as well be a different language. An alert that says, okay, here, log4shell has been detected. And this information is very useful to a security person. It includes maybe a severity, what makes it dangerous, whether it's fixable, potentially location of where that might exist, CVSS scores, maybe a CVE number or type. But actually, to a developer, there are quite a number of things missing. So, the location here is in a container. Great, we've got the container name, but is the vulnerability in the base image, the parent image? Is it something in the Docker file I need to change? It's fixed in a specific version, but that's missing further details as well. Is this a direct dependency, a transitive dependency? What's the change I need to make? If log4shell is 3 levels deep in my dependency graph, I don't need to know what version my log4shell fix is in. I need to know what I need to change my direct dependency to in order for it to pull in log4shell at a new version. So, and of course, with log4shell as a great example, this exists in 2/3 transitive. 2/3 of the time, this vulnerability exists in transitive dependencies. So this is really important to distinguish the difference between a developer style of information versus a security style of information. Equally, from a security style, the breadth is really important. For a developer, that depth of knowledge is increasingly important. Now, if you force a developer to do their own research, to do their own debugging and detection of more data, it's a recipe for making little progress on adoption, because they have their own deadlines and things that they need to achieve in a small amount of time, and wasting time or spending time on things which a good tool, a good process could give them is, again, frustrating, and something, if they don't see the value in spending that time doing that, is something they'll avoid and actually prefer to do something else that they know can provide them with a greater bang for their buck, in terms of their time and impact in that sprint. Vendors today, including us, will tell you about this wonderful DevOps infinity loop, telling you about how the world should be. And some teams are very good at this. Some teams maybe not so far along this path. And when it comes to applications today, Some more agile applications are moving towards this continuous loop, but they're very often a little bit separate. And that's not unusual. This is a journey that we take to this. So very often the development teams versus the IT controls, the infrastructure platform teams, there's a little bit of a gap there. And they tend to have their own loops, and these loops really need to tie together. And very often this leads to finger pointing in terms of, you need to do this, no, I do that, who's responsible for this, where's that ownership gap? And this, when we think about application security as a whole, there are many different groups in which people need very clear and distinct ownership and responsibilities, and without that, people will almost like finger point as to who needs to do what, or will assume someone else has it. So in order to achieve good adoption, it's really important to understand what roles are and clarity around what each group need to do. Okay, so challenges that organizations have with developer adoption. The first three items here, these are things that we've mentioned so far. So developers lose trust in either the data, the tooling, the process, whatever that is, and security become that blocker. They're the person that the development teams don't want to go to because it's time consuming, and it's not easy for them to progress. Tooling is a big thing, and it's tiresome to debug, gather more information where your tooling potentially fails. And that ownership and split of shared responsibility between teams and between roles is core to that. But of course, there are other things when we think organizationally that are important for that development group, including what they actually need to do, deliver code. They have other stakeholders, product teams, and so forth, about what they need to do in that sprint, or what they need to do in the few weeks that they're trying to deliver line items and code. So do they have time for that? Do they have the empowerment to actually spend time doing that from their leadership teams, from the organization, to provide them with the time to do that work? And also, are they at the right levels of education? This isn't just talking about security education. Let's talk about remote code execution or anything like that. This is about secure development education. Are they educated enough about the process, about how they're to deal with exceptions, when they should be testing, what are the policies that they are allowed to pass or test, and who to go to when something fails? There's a huge amount of skills in secure development, that process and that practice, that needs to be really well articulated and made aware to the organization in order to, and this takes time. This isn't something that gets done overnight. This is something that takes time, with a big run up in terms of, before you make process changes or workflow changes, making sure teams are aware of that and they understand it, know who to go to talk about questions and things like that. Okay, so let's go into some best practices, and a lot of the best practices here, I kind of, like, as I mentioned, I came up with from discussions with other organizations, things that they say worked well for them and things that they say don't work well, and I kind of try to create them into some of the best practices that others can learn from. Now, some of these, you might say, actually, this won't work for our team or organization, and that's okay. There's no golden bullet here, otherwise everyone will be doing the same thing. It's about identifying what works for your organization and culture and growing that through. So let's start about the collaboration. This is starting on the people side, so the collaboration and how we learn about our dev teams from a security point of view. Very often the security needs and the development needs can be very, very different. And what security need devs to do, devs sometimes don't align very well with that. And it's because they have different needs and come from a different point of view. And it's really important. The devs aren't going to necessarily want to always spend time trying to understand the security point of view. But given we're trying to get the devs to do various things, it's important we understand where they're coming from and why they might push back. So it's really core to understand a number of things. First of all, their appetite for change. And that's not just security change, that's everything. That's like technology change, process change. What is that? How well are they at adapting and making, understanding something is better to do another way, and as a result, doing that. Also understanding their maturity, the team maturity. How old is that team? How old is the project? And also process maturity and their practices that they do. How mature are they in that? And all of these things is really just to kind of like get knowledge about when you make requests or when you want to make change, you need to do it very in line with the types of change that they are used to, with the speed that they are used to. Other things like project ownership. When we look at projects, we're all, I'm sure, aware of legacy projects and projects which many teams use. But which team actually actually own that? Is there a team that own these? And of course, team capacity. Sometimes teams are so extraordinarily busy that the thought of adding anything more is kind of, to be frank, ridiculous. And it's about prioritization and who are their stakeholders, and is it worth reaching out to them to kind of like say, look, security needs to be prioritized as well. How do we add this in? Devs don't often make those decisions. We need to work with the organization as a whole. But at its core, this slide is all about building empathy for your development teams, understanding the needs of your development teams, the pains of your development teams, and then us understanding from a security point of view how we can best address that the way they want it to be addressed. Because very often when we think about certain programs and things that we roll out, we just try and say, hey, this is what I want. Let me try and push this out as much to developers as I can. Oh no, that's weird. They're not accepting it because it's not a need of theirs. It's just more work for them. It's not a pain of theirs that they need solving. So we need to think about it from their point of view and talk carefully with those dev teams. Now, a great way for collaboration between developers and security is the concept of a security champions program. And at its core, a security champions program is the ability for a developer on a development team, whose core role is to develop software and deliver software, to also spend a percentage of their time, maybe it's 10%, 20%, 5%, whatever is agreed, that percentage of their time to be spent improving the development practices, the workflows, etc., to make it more security aware and also have that secure development flow working better. Now, the reason why this can be very effective, and I say can be because Security Champions is a hard program to do well and to be effective. It takes a lot of nurturing, it takes a lot of care to create these programs. But when done well, you get a security champion who is a developer trying to push change within their development organization, or the development team, sorry. You have a dev to dev conversation about changing workflows, about changing security needs. They are already the most empathetic people to developers they can be because they're developers themselves. And as a result, that change, that communication happens in a completely different way. There's no defensive discussions or anything like that. It happens in a completely different way. And so security champions is a great way for me, and I've seen these work very, very successfully and also very poorly as well. But when working successfully, these can actually really unlock that developer adoption of not just tooling, processes, everything from ways of working like threat modeling or whatever it is. Security champions can provide that. Now, this is something which is very, very underrated. The ability to then look to your development team and say, do you know what? You've done this really, really well. Here's a reward or some recognition. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One, because we want to say, we want to recognize good behavior. We want to say, this is good, do more, do this more, and here's us saying thank you. But also, this is a cracking way of allowing others to see that recognition and that reward in a public space, so that they will want to actually lean in and say, actually, I want to do this. I want to achieve this as well. So first of all, call outs, just being able to say, well done in a public space, like, not public as in externally, but public as in within, loudly across the organization. So it could be a department meeting. It could be your director of engineering or VP of engineering in a company conference saying, hey, this team are absolutely leading the security push, or this individual was the catalyst to including security testing on every push for every pull request. Whatever it is, it needs to be public within the organization. And it is far better when this comes from an engineering leader rather than a security leader. We always know security leaders care about this, but we want engineering leaders to publicly care about this and say to the organization, this is important to us as a development organization. And that top-down support is really core to the mindset and mentality of the organization beneath them. When we do highlight team success, let's also make sure that we provide a path for others to follow. So when we say, hey, look at what this team did, they've implemented threat modeling, and every function, every feature that gets pushed through in the last 6 months has been threat modeled. And we've identified that when we do this threat modeling, the areas of risk, we are showing, the numbers of vulnerabilities match the risk areas, and we're treating them accordingly. When we say that, we need to create a path for others. So not just this is what we do today, but how did we get there? What were the first steps that we did to do that? And can we document that? Can we engage others to talk with our teams about how they can do that too? And this following the footsteps, again, it's a dev to dev conversation. We, as from a security point of view, can enable that. We can connect people together. But how do we not just highlight team success, but replicate that? And of course, swag, right? Everyone loves t-shirts and badges and stickers and all kinds of things. Use gamification if that's what you feel your culture within your organization leans into. Don't if not, don't feel like you have to do something because it's worth trying. Do it because you feel that's what works in your organization. But recognize that some people care about certain things, other people care about others. Maybe career path or education is great. Maybe you can offer rewards like going to a DEF CON or going to RSA or Black Hat or something which you feel like those security champions or team members could really benefit from. It's quiet in the chat and in the Q&A, so feel free to let me know what you're thinking. If you've tried these and they don't work for you, why didn't they work? If you've tried other things that are successful, let me know. And yeah, we can chat about it either in the chat or the Q&A. Okay, so that was people. That was a very, very important piece to change mindset and to change the way we almost like as an organization approach this. Yeah, Matthew. So Matthew says part of the security champions. So are you a developer? Is it Matthew? Oh, sorry, Caitlin. Sorry, Caitlin. Are you a developer, Caitlin, or on the security side? A dev. And yeah, swag helps, right? And I bet actually, Caitlin, I'd love to ask you, when you wear your hoodie, do others, I bet others, first of all, when they see it, they're almost like not jealous per se, but they're like, oh, I wonder if I could get that, or they recognize it as well, right? And they want to be a part of it. And swag is actually really good from a belonging point of view, right? You're part of a security community. Then it's part of your identity as well. I am a secure developer. This is what I stand for. And it's swag is really cool. Actually, it means a lot more than we sometimes give it credit for. I've also heard of some people who they 3D print like coins, security champion coins, and things like that people can have by their desk. And yeah, swag stickers for laptops to say I'm a security champion, and those kind of things. Yeah, where did you get that? It's definitely a question. But more so the other champions like to match. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, oh, what did you have to do to get that? Or you start getting discussion around the development group about what that means. What is a security champion or whatever? And I think it's a great way of actually fostering that discussion for sure. Thank you, Kit. Okay, let's jump into processes now. And so when we think about processes, one thing we absolutely can't and should never do is provide, from a security point of view, say, hey, devs, here's a process which we want you to now do. It's happening at this time, just do it. We absolutely need to include developers in our process changing decisions. We can never just say, hey, this is something that we absolutely need to do. We need to even if it's something that at a corporate level, it needs to be done. We need to make discussion with development teams so that they're on board. Okay, we need to say, hey, this is what we need to achieve. What's the best way of doing this? I'm thinking maybe this. What do you think? And make sure that they're on board with those changes. And they can't just say, no, I'm not going to do this if it's against regulation or policy or anything like that. That we need to come to an agreement. But what is the best way in which we do that? I just recognized I'm running out of power. Right, literally just got back from London, so I shall plug my laptop in so that this isn't the shortest webinar in history. So yeah, when we think about that, make sure we do that and recognize that when we do make changes and when we do make process changes, not every dev team is the same. So it's not okay to say, hey, this dev team does this, it works really well, let's just roll this out across the entire group, because what you'll see is different dev teams wanting to work in a different way, and friction for one dev team might not exist for others. And when we think about dev teams, think about these really high performing leadership teams, other teams that are more adopters and they kind of like make changes when it's been proven, and other teams that are more inertia driven and don't want to change. You know, they've done development this way for the last 20 years, and God damn, they're going to do that development the same way for the next 20 years, right? How do we work into that? How do we include them in the decisions to understand how they can accept it best? When we do make changes, first of all, do it as a run-up, right? You don't make changes and say, oh, yeah, this is happening Monday. If you make a process change and you even put demands on that to say, look, we're not going to be able to push this code until these checks are done, or these tests are done, or these tests are green, then we need to say this is happening by this date in the future. We'll provide you with education and information and feedback, accept feedback. And by this date, you should already be working at a state whereby this isn't actually going to affect you because you're already doing that. And where we see actually, if I take the conversation just briefly to Snyk, where we do policy changes so that we have what is accepted and not accepted with vulnerability thresholds, we see a lot of customers that when they do say, oh, by the way, now we're not accepting criticals or highs through this pipeline, it's the kind of thing that takes, you know, a couple of months or a few months to actually implement by saying, right, this is going to happen by end of quarter. We want you to start working on it now so that by the end of quarter, you are so used to this, fixing this early and you know, only pushing code that meets these requirements, that this isn't even going to affect you. But this needs to happen early in terms of the awareness, how people do this, what it means, how they can change their policies and their IDs and these kind of things, so that when it comes to that date and the process change actually is mandated, it doesn't come as a surprise, and it's not it's not a hurdle. And keep it simple, right? Over complex processes that are out of workflow, they're not going to be done. They're not going to be done properly, certainly as you want them to be done. So keep it simple and keep it in the existing workflows. Try to alter or add to existing workflows. Don't create new processes or workflows that developers won't want to adopt. And now, as part of process, it's really important to kind of like add that the governance. And governance comes in a number of ways. It comes in, you know, I guess, visibility of making sure that these kind of tests and results are actually happening, but also being able to feed that back and say, hey, this is how you're performing. Not so that they can be judged, but so that they know how they're doing. And it's really important. Actually, scorecards is a great way. When I was talking to a very large group who thousands and thousands upon thousands of development teams, they have a very mature security champions program, and the way they use scorecards is every security champion that joins has to fill out a scorecard for their group, for their the development team. And in this scorecard, they essentially say that it's like a self-assessment of their processes, their behaviors, their posture to some extent in terms of where they test, when they test, what they test, that kind of thing. And this provides us with almost like a maturity, almost like a spider diagram of maturity, right? So you might have process metrics and tooling metrics and collaboration metrics and those kind of things. And they can see where they're doing well and where they're not doing well. And they can put into a plan how they want to improve. And as part of these scorecards, we can also add operational metrics. So number of vulnerabilities being fixed, number of vulnerabilities being introduced, maybe total posture, risk across different projects or assets. And this accountability is important, because if we allow, you know, developers just to add technical debt from a security point of view into the backlog continually, they'll continue to do it, right? We need to be accountable to our actions, and we need to be responsible for delivering code within our policies and within our processes. And this visibility and transparency help that. And we can also do this across teams, so that we can see how we're doing with others. If others are doing better, hey, what are you doing that we're not? And let's try and work out how we can improve together. Sometimes, and not always, gamification and developer values are important here. So no one wants to be at the bottom, everyone wants to be at the top. If that's something that works for you and your dev teams get engaged and work with that, then feel free to do that. But if they don't push that, because that's just something that can very much push back. And of course, scorecards and these operational metrics can obviously be rolled up as they go. And when we talk about accountability, as these get rolled up to whether it's an MD or a CTO, whoever it is for that group, they need to care. They need to understand if something's trending poorly, is it intentional? Are we actually putting more time on something else intentionally? And is that okay? If we are not, then we need to spend more time on that. And this is a top-down accountability to make sure this is that the secure development is working well. Now, when we think about speed of rollout, we need to be a little bit careful here, because while we think, hey, just doing this one little thing is easy, we need to think about other things like cost of fix and what actually it means for a developer to actually perform that fix or to do that additional thing, which we might think is easy and take seconds, but actually can take longer. So we need to recognize the teams that we want to pick first, and don't try and do a big bang approach where we try and pull everyone in and do everything at once. We need to roll out, first of all, to the most adaptable teams. It says here the teams that are most likely to adjust to change, and we do this in a way whereby the changes are small, maybe visibility only, and then slowly build that up with a kind of like low touch to medium touch, depending on where they use a tool or where they add that process in. And I think if we take application like vulnerability management as a good example here, one of the ways in which we see Snyk rolled out, for example, is very often they don't try and boil the ocean and say, look, we've got 10,000 or 100,000 vulnerabilities, let's get that down straight away. Very often it's about building that muscle. And the secure development muscle is about, first of all, context, and slow change. So from a development point of view, maybe you focus them, first of all, only on new code that they write. So only on code that goes through the pipeline first, unless, of course, there are really big, significant, critical vulnerabilities that are exploitable and reachable, etc., in runtime that need fixing. With that exception, we add small changes to and say, maybe critical vulnerabilities that have fixes, let's try and eliminate those first. And we through the pipelines, add maybe a few checks, and we identify where we can fix those. And then over time, maybe we increment that and say, okay, now criticals and highs, and criticals, if whether or not they have a fix, whether or not they're reachable or whatever it is, let's just try and fix them and get them out. And we slowly build up the policies so that enables us to build this muscle. And when that muscle is strong enough to actually go, yeah, actually this is very easy to do, and it's natural for me to do, we effectively can then start looking at things like the backlog, and then start looking at other things to try and drop that down. But it's about, and I think there's a slide a little bit later about overwhelming developers, not overwhelming developers, and doing it slowly enough so that we build that muscle without ripping it. It's very much like, if we're running a marathon, right? You wouldn't just go, bang, I'm going to run 10 miles today, right? You maybe do a run walk for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you build it up slowly. And that's exactly how we need to think about this. Anything else will be overwhelming, and we will hurt ourselves. We will push back from it and probably spend a good month not doing it because it hurts so much, right? It's a similar notion that we need to think about for this. And yeah, the ramping up of the guardrails. That's how we actually improve it over time. But we need a runway to do this. We need to say, look, this isn't happening overnight. This is happening over months and quarters and years, and we build up. Don't try and include too many teams at once, because the more teams you include, the more teething problems everyone will feel. So let's try and get teams to onboard slowly. Let's iron out issues, document how what a golden path, a good path looks like, and then get others to then follow on from them, maybe a few others. And then, does that work? Yep or no? If it doesn't work, change the documentation, make sure that's good for the next group, and continue that through. Okay, finally, tooling on our last section. So I mentioned overwhelming developers, and tooling, as I mentioned before, it can be noisy, and we can easily provide huge numbers of issues. So when adding tooling, don't say, hey, by the way, this piece of code that you trusted before, yeah, it's got 10,000 issues in it, massively overwhelming. What does a developer do with that? Where do they start? Only initially do it to gain visibility, and then dial up those guardrails at the speed that you are changing culture within those teams. So understand what speed you want to change your culture at, and have your tooling support that change. So have that tooling almost like provide those guardrails, so that when they kind of like veer off track, the tooling can say, by the way, you're off track here. Is this an exception, or did you just not know about it? Did you just not test it? And then allow the development team to make a decision. I kind of added some, mentioned some of these already, but I think the last point is really important to mention, and that is what is really important to fix today. Because with these 10,000 vulnerabilities, let's get real enriched metrics. What is reachable? What is exploitable? What is in a critical place in my production environment? What is connected to PII data, my S3 buckets or my databases? What could potentially happen if this was exploited? And use that data, give that data back to your development team, so that they're really only looking at the most important vulnerabilities, so that they can make an impact early on. And over time, they will naturally do more. But it's important to understand and to provide developers with a smaller list of issues. For those of you who are already working on backlogs and things like that, a good way of providing this to the development team, or maybe you have your development team triage your backlog already, or that's maybe something done by the dev security teams. When you give that backlog or something like that to your development team, make sure you say, look, I'm not going to show you the hundreds of thousands. I'm going to show you the top 5 or the top 10 issues for this month or this sprint. And if they knock down 2 of those, don't just put 2 more in its place, because it is just, you're constantly just, pushing water uphill. There's no way I can get through this backlog. And it's just, whatever I do, I never seem to be able to dent it. So what you do is you say, look, this is the 5 for this month, or whatever cadence you want. And once they knock down 2, you've got 3 left. Then they knock down another 2, there's only 1 to go. I knock down that one. Excellent. I've done my quota. I've got 2 weeks off now that I can do other things. And that will get you actually a far greater cadence over time than if you just constantly have, these are the top 5, because it's always 5 there. It's no different. You never actually have progression within your teams. And again, when you knock 5 out straight away, really, really quickly, celebrate success. Ping the manager to say, hey, this individual just took out 4 vulnerabilities of our top 5 vulnerabilities right now. Let's buy some drinks, or take them out for dinner, or whatever it is, a hoodie or whatever, whatever works. Let's make sure we celebrate that success. Automation, absolutely core. We can't have anything that's manual. It needs to be automated, and it needs to be automated in the existing workflow. So if you've got everything as GitHub Actions, add security as a GitHub action. If you've got tests on pull requests, add testing to your pull requests. If you love IDE plugins, add security into that existing plugin, and have tests on build and so forth. This is how we automate, and this is how we only provide feedback if bad things are happening, right? And use those policies to only notify if something needs to be fixed. If tickets need to be created, can we automate it? If things can be auto merged, we have another one of our big customers does auto scanning with Snyk, auto raising Jira tickets with Snyk, auto pull requests with Snyk, and also auto merge if all tests pass with certain vulnerability types and certain projects. And this is like full end-to-end automation where things are being fixed without a single human needing to go in and say, oh yeah, I want to approve this or change this. It's an incredible automation story. Also, data. Right, the more manual pulling data is, the harder it's going to be for you to do it, and you'll probably only do it a few weeks because it's very hard to build those habits. So when you're consuming data, if you already have dashboards, automate the pulling of that dashboard. Maybe if you're using Snyk, the Snyk reporting API or whatever it is, pull that data automatically and provide it to the team so that they're getting reports of how well they're doing, where they need to do more work on, and be that kind of like heartbeat of saying, you're doing well, you need to do a bit more work here, you're doing well. And this will help us to continue to include that habit of secure development into our existing process. I think this is no, sorry, I've got one more slide after this, which is kind of like a cheat sheet that will hopefully help. But yeah, when we talk about developer tooling and picking developer tooling, I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are a number of things that developers like in dev tooling. It's very hard to kind of like describe, but if it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's a duck. And for a developer, developers know what is a good developer tool and not a good developer tool. And there are a number of things here, like your API, your integrations, your speed, the information that it gives you back, whether it integrates with other developer tools. There are a number of things that that provide developers with that good user experience, and make sure that when you're picking your security tools, you are embracing developer tools. You're not trying to get them to use security tools or any other types of tools, because those tools, guess what? They're for security people, not for developers. So make sure that when you make your choices, you really do focus on the developer feedback of the tooling that you're offering. And I kind of like want to end here. So if there's any questions, I'll talk about this cheat sheet in a second. But if there's any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A, or feel free to add comments and anything like that else into the chat. But I want to finish with this cheat sheet, and I think there's actually a developer adoption white paper that I wrote, which includes this cheat sheet, but it really covers a number of the areas which I suggested throughout this presentation, including people, processing, and tools, and some of the kind of core aspects of some of the takeaways, I guess, from this. So I won't actually, yeah. So G's asking, maybe get a copy of the cheat sheet. I think so. I believe we're going to be sending you an email at the end. What we should probably do is actually send the white paper as well that comes with the developer adoption cheat sheet, or a link to the white paper. Certainly, it's actually downloadable online. And as part of that white paper, I think in the first few pages, this cheat sheet exists in there. So it goes into a ton more depth. The presentation, sorry, the white paper, in terms of what I've discussed today. But yeah, we'll try and make sure we send you either a link to it, to the download, or the download itself. Probably the link to it, because it's a little bit of a big download. Okay, any questions or anything that resonated well with this presentation? Feel free to drop, like I say, in Q&A or the webinar chat. We've had a good number of participants on, pretty much staying to the end. So I'm hoping it was kind of like what you wanted to, the content that you wanted to hear, and the topic was roundabout appropriate for folks on the call. Awesome, thank you, Greg. I can't see any questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. This was great. I did have a question about the use of AI tools for devs to leverage security. Yeah, interesting. When you talk about AI tools here, are you talking about tools that allow for fix, or because I think there's a number of different ways in which AI can be used, or certainly generative code can be used. AI security tooling can the area that I think is actually really nice is to actually identify anomalies, and to really kind of like work out what business as usual looks like, and then try and identify where issues can exist. Okay, so GitHub now includes ChatGPT. Yeah, I see what you mean. So yeah, this is interesting because, of course, when we think of, so let's take an example of some code generation. Okay, so could we identify where certain issues could exist, and can we actually use something like ChatGPT to generate code for us to actually fix those as well? Let's not forget that ChatGPT is actually using a set of data to actually pull in code from, and if that data contains issues, I mean, we remember Copilot and things like that pulling in API keys and things like that, right? I don't think we can yet ascertain whether ChatGPT is going to be good enough to be able to provide us with non-vulnerable code. First of all, I think there's a big area of work to be done in and around that. One of the other things is a couple of things I would say with ChatGPT. First of all, when we try and show and when we try and look and create or even scan across areas of code, we can only put in around 1,000 lines into ChatGPT, for example, to be able to identify where issues are. And actually, over multiple files, the context really gets lost. So I think there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of actually being able to identify data flows and to be able to identify whether something is vulnerable just through AI assessment of that. There's one thing that I will mention actually with SnykCon. We've also been using kind of like machine learning in the way that SnykCon identifies issues in. So SnykCon is our SAST tool. And one of the interesting ways in which we've used AI there is typically when people, create rules or rule sets and they try and identify patterns, it's typically the security researchers that are building those rule sets up, right? And trying to identify what a pattern looks like, whereby that we can say, yeah, this is a pattern that shows vulnerable code or not. And the way we use AI or machine learning is we train SnykCon on actually our third-party vulnerability database. So we say, look, here's a ton of these types of issues. Learn what this issue looks like and generate us the rules. So we're not, as a security researcher, creating the rules. We're using AI to create the rules for us. And then once it creates those rules, we then run that against hundreds of thousands of repositories. And when we do that, we get a ton of data back, and we can sit there painfully going, yes, this is a vulnerability. Yes, this is a vulnerability. No, that's not a vulnerability. No, that's not a vulnerability. Yes, that is a vulnerability. And this then iterates through, and the engine will kind of like say, okay, let me create a different set of rules for you this time. And we iterate and iterate and iterate till we get a really interesting set of rules, which provides a very, very low set of false positives. So I think it's interesting how AI and things like ChatGPT are going to help us going forward. But I feel like context is king here. And I think without that, ChatGPT has shown itself to be extremely good for text and things like that. But I feel like there are a number of things that it is not going to be able to do today. But who knows in future? I think that's good. But yeah, great question. I think ChatGPT and generative AI is a really interesting space, and I can kind of like see a lot of people looking at this and trying to work out how we can use this to benefit ourselves from an identification point of view, as well as other things. Yeah, great question. So the question here, we're pretty small as a startup, don't have a dedicated AppSec tool yet. Are there must-haves we should look at to implement a CI/CD pipeline? Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, you want to be fast, I would say, as a startup. You want to be, doing things statically and in process is probably going to be, one of the first ways that we typically see people add AppSec to their environments. Yeah, I mean, I'd look at, depending on what your environment is, your typical static scans might be your third-party code, or your first-party code, or your containers, or your IAC, even cloud. There are a number of tools you could use for that. Some freemium, depending on budget. Some freemium, some open source, some paid. And I would say, I wouldn't say there are must-have tools. I would say there are must-have areas that you should be looking into. I would say SCA and SAST are maybe the cheapest in terms of implementation, Additionally, you might consider, if you want something a little bit more dynamic, maybe something in and around Dast. But I would start looking at the cheaper alternatives in terms of, you know, the time and the implementation time. Static is a great way to start, I would say, and then look at other areas that you might want to add to that. So there is a question. Do you have any tips to efficiently manage security vulnerability disclosures by independent security researchers? So Sage on Q&A, just to understand, are you talking about like SCA is dependency scanning, third party vulnerabilities. Are you, Sage, are you talking about almost like a bug bounty style issue there? Just so I understand. Bug bounty, yeah. That's a great question, actually. In terms of, I think with bug bounties, you're going to get two different types of disclosure. And I think the most important way of efficiently managing disclosures is to identify the type of person or the type of issue that is being raised. Some people in a bug bounty program will just try and raise any old nonsense just because they want a t-shirt or whatever. And it's the most efficient way is to really identify where your major risk is, and kind of like prioritize or triage these types of issues based on that. In the same way, you would effectively do that with your internal SCA scans, maybe. So, you know, you want to triage, you want to add SLAs, and you want to use your expensive developer time or expensive fixed time on the right risk issues. So triage those bug bounties in the same way you would triage your own vulnerabilities. But know, obviously, that because it's come through a bug bounty, it is external. So recognize the potential impact it could have, but understand risk, understand what is the damage this could do to you, almost like a CVSS style score. You know, what is the impact that this is going to have on me? So yeah, it's a tricky one. There's also on the secure developer, which is a podcast that we run. There's a few really good sessions. I think one of the guys from Yahoo was on it, was talking about bug bounty programs. So I'd also recommend listening to a couple of those. That's the secure developer podcast that myself and Guy Pajani, the founder of Snyk, runs. And we talk about a whole number of DevSecOps topics, but bug bounties is covered a fair amount there. So yeah, it's a hard one to go to depth in a short time, but I'd suggest those couple of things. Okay, no worries. Thank you. Secret scanning. Any ideas on when and how to do it? Yeah, secret scanning is a very interesting one, and I think so I mean, yeah, secret scanning is something that can be done statically, and it needs to be done in two different ways. I think it needs to be done across your pipeline. So make sure that as you and actually before your pipeline, because don't forget, anytime you add a commit with a secret in, that commit is in your Git history. And that's a really important thing to recognize. So when we talk about secrets, as early as possible, very often if something's in your Git repo and it's an SCA dependency problem, it can be in your, it can be tested in your Git repo and in your pull request and stuff. And it's not, it doesn't matter because it's not hitting production. However, a secret, if something, if something hits into your Git repo, it's in your Git history. And if that's something which is accessible by other people, it's there. So I think scanning, regularly and early is very, very important. One other important thing to do is to use a tool that will actually look through your Git repo historically. Something like I don't know, Truffle Hog or something like that is actually a really good tool to actually look at your entire Git history, look at your Git repo, and identify issues that exist in your repo. And I think that covers history and things like that as well. I think things like Snyk code as well, right? Snyk code as a SAST scanner will identify some secrets in your first party code as well, and it will show that like a vulnerability, and it'll say, hey, you're adding a secret here. There are ways to do that. But yeah, using a vault well is extremely important, and having a good education about what is a secret and what isn't a secret with your team and how to use vaults properly is extremely important. So yeah, as early as possible. It's even more important with secrets to do that earlier. Also, think about code reviews as well, particularly if you've got security champions programs. it should be part of a code review to, are we releasing secrets here? Are we doing anything that we don't want to do? Because once we do it, it's very, very hard to go back. Yeah. Okay, we are very fast approaching time. Oh, right, excellent. Well, feel free to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madhav. Great to meet you, and it'd be great to connect afterwards. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and we can continue the discussion as well. And with that, yeah, I'd love to wrap up this webinar. First of all, thank you everyone for attending and staying pretty much on to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found certain gems useful, and I think that's what this is about: identifying the gems that are useful to you, and using those parts to your advantage. We'll email you more details on this, and feel free to reach out if there's anything else we can help with, or anything you want to discuss in further depth. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.